Hello again and welcome back to the Book of Brett and another episode of Manic Movie Reviews. Today we are going to be reviewing The Woman in the Window, which is from this year I believe and currently streaming on Netflix. I decided to watch this for two reasons. One, it was the only one on the top 5 of Netflix's trending list that looked like it would be anything that I would actually enjoy. And the other reason was because it had Gary Oldman in it. And I will pretty much watch anything that Gary Oldman is. I absolutely love Gary Oldman. But this film also has Amy Adams in it, who plays our antagonist Anna, I believe was her name. And then we've also got Julianne Moore in this. And so we've actually got a pretty decent cast. And the whole movie is about this agoraphobic woman who is clearly dealing with a lot in addition to her agoraphobia. New neighbors end up moving in next door, and she pretty quickly becomes suspicious of the dad, played by Gary Oldman. And then some events start to unfold, as well as her mental state. I wasn't really expecting much going into this film. I'm trying to make a habit of going into movies blindly, not reading reviews online, not really reading too much about the synopsis, except maybe when I see like a trailer or something like that. I will generally watch a trailer first. And overall, this was actually a pretty fun movie. There's not really anything new going on here. You've got a lot of tropes in here, like the lead character going further and further into their psychosis and it affecting real world events. And then, of course, everybody around her not believing what's going on, which makes her more crazy. I will say there are a lot of different twists and turns that you can really see coming. But every time one of them happens, like, you kind of recognize that it's a cliche. But when we get to the ending, I can honestly say I really did not see the ending coming. I'm not going to ruin it. I'm going to try and make this as spoiler-free as possible. But other than, like, really clunky kind of dialogue, like, the way the characters interact with one another seems really off, seems really unnatural. Some of it is explained later, like the way Kathy talks to Anna. Like, the first time she comes into her house, one of the things she's saying is she's calling her house shitty. Like she says it like 2 or 3 times, talks about how her house is shitty. And all I could think the whole time was, if somebody just came into my house, and this is the first time I'm meeting them, and this is how you're talking about my home, I'm either going to ask you to leave or I'm going to call you out on your shit. One of those things is going to end up happening. One of the things this movie does do very well is, I think, really encapsulates the stress and the intensity of the mental illness that Anna's dealing with. But there's actually one scene in particular that I thought did really, really well. It's when the trick-or-treaters come up to her door and they're throwing eggs at her windows because she didn't leave any candy out. As we all know, this is something that in certain areas kids will do. They'll go and throw eggs if you didn't put any candy out. That's why I don't give candy to kids. I just put it outside. If one of them steals it, fine, whatever. But they're egging her house, and there's only a few of them, and they're little kids, and they're not, obviously not imposing people, but it's just breaking her, and she doesn't know how to deal with it, and she's screaming, "This is my house, this is my house," because it's the only safe place she has. The performances are actually very well done. Julianne Moore has like a real small part in this. There's not really enough to go off of to really say whether it's bad or good. I mean, it's not bad, but there's not really a moment, a groundbreaking moment in the film where you're like, that's an amazing performance. I will say Amy Adams gives an awesome performance as somebody who's dealing with a lot of mental issues. And then, of course, we've got Gary Oldman that plays the dad, and he's, again, we don't really get a lot of the side characters. Like, the side characters kind of come in and out of scenes very easily. They come in and then they're gone. It mostly really, really focuses on Anna and everything that she's dealing with. So there isn't really like a big moment that happens with Gary Oldman to be like, this was one of his like greatest performances, or this was one of his great performances. I mean, he gives an amazing performance, but that's because he's Gary Oldman, and he's Gary Oldman. He always does a good job. I've never seen Gary Oldman in a role that I did not like him in. Now, as I said, we do have Anna dealing with her agoraphobia and everything that kind of comes along with that, but just even from the get-go, her character is very, very unlikable. Now, I've never dealt with somebody who has agoraphobia, so maybe there's an element of me not knowing what I'm talking about to this, but I feel like even somebody with agoraphobia isn't going to be this outright hostile to almost everybody she interacts with. And she's very, very unlikable in how she deals with her interactions with people. Now, again, I understand agoraphobia. Part of that is dealing with people and not wanting to do that and having an aversion to it, basically. But I mean, this feels like she's like outright being hostile with people, like as soon as she meets them. Like Ethan's a great example. When she meets Ethan, it's very hostile in the way that she's standing there and talking to him, and even from the very beginning you can tell there's something a little off with Ethan. It almost comes off like autism a little bit. They don't really touch on what he's got. At one point they just kind of mention that he's sensitive, but it's very clear that something's not right there. And I feel like if you're a psychologist, you're not going to be this outright hostile to people when everything up until probably the last, it's hard to tell, but the last year or so, you've dedicated your life to helping people. And so that just felt a little unnatural. But again, that's really, I think the biggest sticking point with this movie is a lot of the interactions feel very stilted. They feel very unnatural. And that was the thing that I think stuck out the most to me. We do have one of the detectives, I think her name is Detective Morelli. I understand they're trying to do the whole bad cop, good cop thing with her and the other detective that get involved with everything after she makes the first phone call because she thinks she sees a murder. Detective Morelli is very hostile in everything that she's doing, almost like overly so. And speaking of when Anna thinks she sees a murder, she thinks she sees Julianne Moore's character get murdered. There's nothing that really stands out as far as the scene itself and how it plays out within the context of the world it's created. There are a couple things that really, really stood out to me about this whole scene. First of all, there's this really odd editing choice where all this blood like splatters, like clearly cartoonish looking blood splatters. And I don't know if this was meant to be like a POV thing or anything like that, but it was just really weird and really, really stood out from the scene as a whole. But the thing that stood out in this scene the most to me is when Julianne Moore's character is getting stabbed, and the whole thing takes place with whoever her attacker is, who we find out later, but again, I'm not trying to ruin anything. The entire time the attacker and the person she's arguing with is in between, like you've got a window and then you've got a section of brick, which is, you know, the space in between the windows, and it's basically the width of like a human body, and the entire time the attacker manages to stay in between these windows and never once budge into view. And it just doesn't feel realistic. It just doesn't feel realistic when you really think, because you find out later the relationship between Julianne Moore's character and her attacker. You find out what the relationship is there, and this is basically what it comes down to, is this is a very passionate murder. And I feel like you're not going to be that cognizant of where are the windows, can anybody see me? And of course, at some point, this person has to leave and you got a wall of windows. It just doesn't make sense. They just manage to stay there, and it's happening because it's convenient for the story and it's convenient for the plot twist that we end up getting. And as I said, there are a lot of twists and turns in this story. The twists and turns don't feel unnatural, mostly because we've seen all of them before. Like I said, this movie is not breaking new ground. It's not really doing anything new as far as the twists and turns go. It does, however, I really think takes some of this stuff and really plays with it well and brings us to a conclusion that is at least sound, except for one thing that these movies always seem to do that always kind of rubs me the wrong way. There's been this conclusion to all this chaos that's going on, and then all of a sudden she's just over her agoraphobia. And that doesn't make any sense to me, because everything that's been going on, you don't have a conclusion to the thing that's been causing the agoraphobia or causing her mental instability. So the only conclusion you really have is to this event that's been going on, that the event was caused by her mental instability. And so this event coming to a conclusion just somehow leads her to be over her agoraphobia and her anxiety and all these other issues she's had going on, and that's just not how it works. And I understand it's a movie, you have to have this like happy-go-lucky conclusion, although I will say I am a bigger fan of movies that don't end in happy-go-lucky conclusions, but what do I know? I'm a sadist at heart. At the end, she's moving, of course she's moving out of her house, she's moving on with her life, but it just doesn't make any sense that this is over and now her agoraphobia is better. Especially with the way this movie ends. If this was happening in real life, and this situation ended the way that this movie ends, it would make the agoraphobia worse. It would validate your concerns, and you would go, well, now I'm sure never going outside. Like, everything isn't fine. Everything that happened validates all the issues you've been having. The things that I really did like about this movie, it is shot very well. I did really like the cinematography in this. The lighting is actually very good too. We do get some of that stylized lighting, sometimes a little bit overly so. Like certain rooms are, you know, certain colors, obviously to match the mood. And if you really can read the language of film, you can see what it's really saying through the lighting, which is where it does it well. However, sometimes it's just a little bit much. Like we've got sun coming in through red curtains, but it's making the whole room the shade of those curtains, which is just, that's not how light works. But again, it's also adding to the point where she likes it dim, she likes it to be drab and dreary. So, but anyway, guys, that is going to do it for this episode of Manic Movie Reviews. As I said before, go check out 2021's The Woman in the Window. It is streaming on Netflix right now. As of the filming of this episode, it is #1 on Netflix's trending list. Who knows where it'll be at tomorrow, but I will say overall, it was definitely a pleasant surprise. I went into it blindly. At a certain point, I started getting real skeptical because it was like, okay, I've seen this. Okay, I've seen this. I got on board with it when all of the things I thought were going to happen ended up just leading to a new twist after that, and then we finally get to our conclusion, which overall I thought was done really well. It could have been done much, much, much worse. I actually thought they did a good job with the ending. Anyway, guys, if you are liking the episodes, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you liked this episode, go ahead and throw me a like. If you didn't, throw me a thumbs down. Do be sure to leave movie suggestions down in the comments. Like I said, subscribe, like, comment. I'll see you guys next time.